Right.
If you want to get us started, I'll move into the second slide.
Yeah. So we kind of already introduced ourselves. Zach's also being super humble. He wins all the time. So huge expert. So thanks to him for helping me out with this.
Yeah, so let's kind of get started right away with what an injury is. I think it's such a broad term, and it's something that I gained an appreciation for in the doctorate program in physical therapy. Of just, we broadly say injury, but there's so many different types, there's some different kinds, there's some different ways to get injured, and each one has its own preventative care that we need to take into consideration. So there's definitely the musculoskeletal injuries. That's what most people consider an injury, especially in my profession in physical therapy. We always talk about muscle strains, sprains, ankle rolls, things like that. The three types of musculoskeletal injuries you're going to see out there the most are going to be acute injuries, which is you're running down the trail, you're hiking, a rock moves underneath your foot and you roll your ankle pretty bad. It can result, actually witnessed it last week. I was at the Trans Rockies race. It's a 6-day stage race through the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. And on day 4, we had one of our athletes go out and within the first quarter mile, stepped on a rock wrong, rolled her ankle, and it ended up being a fracture. So she actually broke her ankle. And so that's more of an acute injury. That is, something happened and you are now injured. The best way, the easiest thing for me to remind me of what an acute injury is an ankle roll. You have one incident that causes it. Then you have chronic musculoskeletal injuries, which is dependent on each person. So with a chronic muscle injury, it could be an imbalance in the musculoskeletal system. It can be something that gets injured once. For example, it could be a rolled ankle that has turned into a loss of proprioception or understanding how your ankle moves in time and space. That proprioception decreases after an ankle roll just because we've damaged some tissue. And is what will happen is you'll continually roll that ankle. And then you're in a situation where you have this chronic cycle of injury and then an inflammatory response, injury, inflammatory response. Every time you do that, you build up a little bit more scar tissue. So that scar tissue is a lot less pliable, it doesn't move as much, and it doesn't have the nerve endings in it that our soft tissue, other soft tissue does, that will allow us to gain more function or range of motion. So you're more likely to continue rolling that or continue injuring that soft tissue. If you have a chronic hamstring strain, something like that, that is going to also weaken the tendons over time. And then you are going to have this just chronic reoccurring injury because the soft tissue is not as strong as it should be. And then overuse injuries. This is going to be more of along the lines, if you're someone who has a knee valgus or your knee kind of rolls inward when you run, you're putting a lot of stress on a certain part of the body. One of the things I love most about physical therapy is looking at every single muscle in the body. It's all doing its own little job, and it does it right on time, and it does it with just the right amount of energy. And as long as everybody is playing the right music, the concept of the body is beautiful and it sounds amazing. But once one person gets out of tune, then it all starts to sound a little funky and no one can keep up with the tempo. It sounds weird, all that kind of stuff. So to relate that to the human body, these overuse injuries are ones that one of your muscles, one of your tendons, one of your ligaments, some soft tissue has gotten out of tune. And with time, that's going to create all the other muscles are going to have to compensate for that. And they're doing more than they should do, or you're putting a constant stress on that soft tissue. So it is going to, with time, you're going to develop a tendinopathy, a tendonitis, weak musculature that just can't support the body the way it needs to. So those are your 3 types of musculoskeletal injuries: acute incidents, chronic reoccurring injuries that just are going to damage the tissue, and then an overuse injury that could be corrected with time. And that's what we kind of want to see. Also, we're going to talk about some like heat-related injuries, especially it being summertime. We're out there, you run into some heat cramps, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, things like that. We really need to take care of ourselves in terms of the elements. It's not just our body, it's the elements that put the pressure on our body as well we need to be concerned about. Other injuries that we're going to discuss today are going to be rhabdomyolysis, hypothermia, hyponatremia, lightning strikes, and animal encounters, because these are all things that I have been a part of in the Wasatch Mountains here. that is worth bringing up. At least it struck something in my memory to say, hey, we need to watch out for this kind of stuff. Next slide. So when you're looking at the musculoskeletal injuries, again, we're looking at acute injuries in terms of sprains, strains, breaks. Those are those instantaneous. You had a particular amount of force put on the body all at one time, whether you fall and break a wrist or something like that. You see it with sprinters all the time. They sprint out of the box and they pull a hamstring or their hamstring ruptures. We see it in basketball sometimes with Achilles ruptures. So those are kind of more things that are like the strains and sprains. Again, overuse, we discussed that. There's an imbalance and we're constantly putting too much strain on one part of the body versus everything acting in concert and supporting each other, which is going to cause an overuse injury with time. And then the chronic, again, we're looking at like IT band syndrome, stress fractures, tendonitis, stress fracture probably being the most common of these chronic. That means that we're weakening the bone tissue with time and we're putting a lot of stress on it. And then after time, after a lot of work and it constantly being fatigued, it will break down and cause stress fractures. Next slide. Okay, so just to differentiate between strains and sprains, this is probably the biggest thing that I hear in the clinic. Someone will come and be like, oh, I sprained something or I strained something, and it's used, they're used almost synonymously and they really shouldn't be. So just to understand the difference between a strain and a sprain, a strain would be like overextending or tearing a muscle or tendon. Again, it's mostly done through trauma, overuse, repetitive movements. We kind of see the strain on something is it's usually done in more of like an overstretched situation. For example, if you best way to describe this one would be like kind of that repetitive movement where you are carpal tunnel syndrome is a great one where you're constantly putting a little strain on it and then it becomes injured with time. We see this a lot in the low back. Hamstring muscles are a great one for specifically runners, just because we're always using those. And if you do something, for example, like a big hike one day or go up a mountain and your body is not used to it, all of those steps you're taking are straining on those musculature system, and those hamstrings, that soft tissue is going to get really agitated and irritated. So that's going to be a strain, is just kind of like with time, a lot of repetitive movements, overuse. It can be caused by trauma, but it is a little bit less common that way. Versus a sprain. So a sprain is kind of overextending and you tear the ligaments. So it's more, a sprain is more ligamentous versus a strain is more musculature. A sprain is going to be more of that instantaneous situation where you, again, roll that ankle. We typically see it in ankles, knees, and fingers. If you fall and try to catch yourself and you put your hand down the wrong way, or I think we've all experienced this in school. In grade school, when you try to catch the ball, the bouncy ball, and it hits the tip of your finger, and it's that sudden overextending of the ligaments in the finger, and that's going to cause this pain that kind of takes a while to go away. So again, falling, twisting the wrong way, rolling ankles, that's what we see in sprains. So sprains are more ligamentous, strains are more musculature, and most of the time done over time versus that instantaneous of a sprain. Next slide. All right, so this is what everyone wants to know. How do we prevent these injuries from happening? Because it's, we know what they are. We know that injuries happen. How do we prevent them? First and foremost, a good proper warm-up is the most important thing. That's why when you see people come into physical therapy, we want to put them on a little bit of heat real quick. We want to get them moving so that we can get blood flow to the area that's going to warm up those muscles and warm up all of that different soft tissue that we have. And it's going to make it more pliable. And make it more alive. So a proper warm-up is always the best way to do it. Again, that's why you'll typically see, in the Olympics, you'll see a sprinter take off out of the blocks And if their muscles aren't warm enough to handle that sudden load, that instantaneous load, that's when you're going to get an injury. So a good, easy warm up. And in fact, every client that I coach, I always tell them, hey, make sure that you are giving the first 15, 20 minutes of your run is very easy. You should be, breathing a little heavy, but not too bad. You want your body to give your body time to become more pliable, to warm up. And also that's why you typically see beginning runners absolutely hate the first 15, 20 minutes of every run, and they usually quit around then. But that's because that's about how long it takes the body to warm up properly. And then after that, you've got the Krebs cycles kicked in, your body's warmed up, you've got all that vascularization has peripheralized down into deep into the muscles. So it's gone all the way down in there, and it's warmed up all that soft tissue. So things feel better at about 15 to 20 minutes. Your heart rate comes down at about 15 to 20 minutes. Just a good, proper warm up is always key. Dynamic movements, mobility movements versus static stretching is always really important there. Another thing that is really important for injury prevention is rest, proper rest. And this is for the people who like to go and push themselves a little bit harder, more regular. Your body only recovers during sleep. That's the only thing we've ever been able to put together in all the literature and all the research, all the muscle massagers, the inflatable leg balloon thingies, all of that stuff. It feels good. There's no doubt that it feels good, and it does move blood in and out, but it does not allow the body to recover. If it feels good, great, do it. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that kind of stuff, but rest, sleep specifically. Deep REM sleep is when we release most of the human growth hormone, which is in charge of rebuilding, repairing, and all that kind of stuff. So sleep is going to be the most important thing. Mobility, again, there's between mobility and flexibility. Flexibility is if I can grab my arm and pull it up over my head with assistance, move it over. But mobility is being able to have that full range of motion and being able to do it myself against gravity. So same with the hips. It's one thing to be able to stretch that hip or stretch that leg by grabbing a hold of it and pulling it up or pulling it behind you. But in order to do it yourself, that is mobility. So strength over the full range of motion. And that's what you really want to work on. Mobility work is far more important. Yoga, things like that are great for mobility work. Body awareness, proprioception, balancing drills are always really good. Speed work drills are really good for your feet. So you can have that foot-eye coordination, helps you on trails quite a bit, helps you decrease the rolling of ankles. And also when you're going downhill and you're moving pretty quick, you really do not want to catch a toe on anything. I've been there, I've done that, it's not fun. Again, proper biomechanics, really think about your form. Like I've said earlier, the body is all those muscles are a concert, and everyone needs to play their part at the right time, right place, and be in the right position in order for it to sound as beautiful as we intend. So that's why I want to work on our biomechanics. Always be thinking about your form. That helps a lot, especially if you're backpacking out in the mountains and you're carrying a load. You want to make sure your form is really good, and you're always consciously aware of that, because it's super easy for us to slack. We do it all the time here on these computers. We tend to like hunch and lean forward. Not the best thing. So you'll probably see me sit back up every now and again, practice what I preach. And again, honing your weaknesses, strength training. If you know that you have a consistently weak hamstring that is injured regularly, strengthen that thing. Make sure that it can handle the load properly. That's what it's all about. And that's what most of our physical therapy is about. Unfortunately, people come in once they've had the weakness and then the injury, and then all we're doing is treating, doing what they should have done earlier. So prevention is key that way. Next slide. Best tools for prevention. Again, I've talked about it, so we'll go over it briefly. Mobility, making sure that you have that full range of motion, and not just the full range of motion, but strength and ability to move your body through that full range of motion by yourself without assistance, without grabbing anything and pulling it. That is mobility. Strength training, that is often overlooked by runners. I can't tell you how many times runners just want to run. They don't want to be in the gym. Adding extra strength or extra weight through strength training is not beneficial. I can tell you it's going to increase your durability and allow you to be in the sport a lot longer and enjoy the mountains a lot more if you can do that. It does dramatically reduce your likelihood of an injury. It is the best thing you can do to prevent injury. Again, a stronger muscle is a more durable muscle, can handle more load. I typically do strength training about 2 to 3 times a week. When I'm in my off season, it's 3 times a week. I'm working super hard. During my peak season, I'm still strength training twice a week, and I do change it up a little bit depending on what my load is outside of that. We don't want to do a big heavy strength session and then go out and do a 20-mile run in the mountains. That's really, again, we're walking into that musculoskeletal injury of overuse and strains. So let's prevent that. Next slide. Rhabdomyolysis. Some of you have heard of rhabdo. For those who have not, that is basically when you're breaking down muscle cells, they're going to release a creatine kinase, and that is a toxic serum that's going to go into the bloodstream. So once it gets into the kidneys, it can cause the kidneys to shut down. So that is one of those unfortunate byproducts of if you're pushing yourself, that's fine. We expect it. I've seen a lot of marathoners get done with a run or get done with a race, and they are going to have urine that is a little darker because of that creatine kinase that is in the bloodstream at that point. Once the muscles break down a little bit, they're going to release some. There's no way to train. There's no way to push yourself. There's no way to go enjoy a day in the mountains without some of that happening. So it's okay. But here are the symptoms of rhabdomyolysis. You're going to get some muscle swelling, cramps, pain. That can be easily overlooked just because you think you're pushing yourself hard. Cramps are going to be normal, pain is going to be normal. So that's kind of an overlooked symptom. And then you run into the muscle weakness and fatigue. If your muscles just can't hold themselves up anymore, if you just can't do what you need to do, that is a sign that a muscle has been severely compromised on top of the swelling and the cramps. That's a good sign. The most common sign here next is going to be the red or brown urine. So if you have urine that is like a tea colored or a cola colored, or if you have trouble urinating or it's painful, that is a huge sign. That is the telltale sign that you are approaching rhabdomyolysis. So if you're not urinating, I've been in races, 100-mile races that have taken me 20, 22 hours where I've urinated twice. And that is a very, very bad sign. And I can't say that I suggest everyone to do that. So keep an eye on that stuff. Keep an eye on your urine when you are urinating, like give it a double check. It's definitely something you should be out there doing, especially on a big hard day or a big hot day. You want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on that. Other symptoms, next slide. For rhabdo, confusion, fever, dehydration, a rapid heart rate, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, more specifically in your kidneys, low back pain. That's something that you should be really concerned about. Those are kind of the final signs of like, if you've approached the other three and then these are happening, it is important to get in to see a physician immediately. EMS needs to be alerted because this could move forward very fast. So make sure you get your physician checks your CK levels and creatine kinase levels. That is going to be the most important thing to do. A lot of times, we, especially as athletes, we might undercut exactly what we're doing, and we don't tell them how hard of a day we've had outside or how little hydration we've had, or if we've been having ibuprofen out there, things like that. You want that hydration to flush the kidneys and to flush that creatine kinase out. Next slide. Again, hydrate, stay well hydrated before, during, and after the exercise. You're trying to flush that creatine kinase out. You're trying to flush that toxic serum out of those kidneys so that they can continue functioning properly and they do not shut down. Start slow, take it easy, take breaks when you need to, work at a slower speed. If you're out there in between sections and you have to go an entire line before you can get out of there and into your next, into a place where you can get help, slow it down. And do not push harder. The only thing you're gonna do is damage more muscle, which is gonna release more creatine kinase, which is gonna cause that rhabdo to flare up a little bit more. Avoid non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. So ibuprofen, try to avoid that as much as possible. You're out there. I know sometimes it's tempting to be like, oh, it's a big hard day. This and that is a little achy right now. I'm gonna take some ibuprofen before I go out there, specifically on hot days, or where you might run the risk of being dehydrated. That's going to make it all the worse because that is going to affect the kidneys their ability to flush that out, which is what we're working for. Again, pace yourself. Strenuous paces, continuous days that we don't want to do that. Take days off if you need to, and then that can dramatically help the kidneys function. Next slide.
Woo.
Weather-related injuries, man, these things happen far more than you think. In fact, just in China, was it 3 months ago, 3 or 4 months ago, unfortunately, there were 21 athletes who died in one single race because they got caught up on a high ridge line and were exposed to the elements. A storm came in that they were not expecting, and they didn't have the proper gear, and they were so far away from help that by the time they got themselves to help, they unfortunately, again, 21 passed away. It is extremely rare that one runner passes away in a race, let alone that many. So definitely weather-related injuries are important to keep in mind. Next slide. We've got the heat emergencies, such as cramps, exhaustion, stroke. We've all kind of been there before. We've experienced that heat. That's not fun. That's pretty straightforward. Hypothermia is another really big one. And yes, even in the summer, we need to worry about it because summer storms come through, especially in the Wasatch. We are a desert. We do experience monsoons. So you are going to get some weather specifically up high. I was just in Colorado up on the mountains at 13,000 feet throughout the last handful of days. And you better believe we had some bad weather up there a couple of those days, some lightning. So hyponatremia is another weather related one just because it is affected by dehydration, overhydration. It is one that heat causes a huge part of that. And then storm safety, we do want to talk about that a little bit. So next slide, heat emergencies. 3 phases of your heat emergencies. So if you are getting you're overheating, which is very easy to do here in the Wasatch when we have 100-degree days. First, you're going to get some heat cramps. Body starts shutting down a little bit. This doesn't happen to everyone. It doesn't normally happen to me. I don't normally get the heat cramps. I go right into heat exhaustion where, that's going to affect me first. And then the worst part is heat stroke, which has fortunately only happened to me once or twice. I do not suggest it. It is terrible. Things can escalate very quickly. You can go, especially when you're in the mountains, you've got a half hour or so to get off a mountain or more. Things can escalate very quickly. So you want to make sure you intervene early, you do the right things, and you prepare most of all. All 3 of these are considered serious injuries. So heat cramps, again, this is the next slide here. This is the first sign of a heat emergency. Get out of the sun, get into some cool shade, drink cold water or an electrolyte beverage, something like that can really help. What you're going to experience is like some muscle pain, some tightness, mostly in the legs, sometimes in the shoulders and low back. You're still sweating a little bit, but you might have just like kind of moist skin, low grade fever, again, less than 102.5, so nothing too crazy. Lightheadedness, weakness, you're starting to feel the heat essentially. This will quickly move into the next phase, which is going to be heat exhaustion. Heat exhaustion is going to be that heat emergency is starting to just rapidly increase. In addition to the signs and symptoms of heat cramps, now you're going to get into some nausea, some vomiting, flushed, hot, dry skin, or maybe slightly moist skin that starts to get pale. This is you're starting to dehydrate, things are getting a little worse. You are going into a fever state, which is above 102.5. Weakness, lightheadedness. Now your breathing is starting to get affected. Rapid, shallow breathing is common. You're going to get a little irrational. You're going to get a little confused. This is exactly why in trail races we're allowed pacers, because at about mile 50, 60, 70, you're going to start to get dehydrated. The heat's been at you all day, and you may get confused and wander off trail. And you need someone there to help guide you and make sure that these symptoms aren't getting worse, which can run right into the next heat emergency, which is going to be heat stroke. Next. This one is the potentially fatal one. This is the one that you start to get really, really delirious, fainting, rapid pulse, rapid breathing. You feel like you can't get your breathing under control. This is when your fever is 104 or greater. This is when you start to really mess with the brain, brain function. It swells up a little bit. You're going to changes in your mental status. Again, more confusion, agitation at this point, slurred speech. Those are the three kind of ones that I've seen most there. This is an absolute emergency. This is when you need to cool down by any means necessary. Get in the shade, douse your clothes, up in a river, do whatever you need to do, and make sure that you get EMS alerted immediately. Next slide. Hyponatremia is when we start talking about the sodium levels in your blood, and they lower than normal. So basically what we're looking at here are symptoms of like muscle cramps, weakness, spasm. You're gonna notice muscle cramps are a pretty common one. So that's when we start to like see the cramps. We need to start looking around and seeing what's causing it. So this one, you're gonna be followed with nausea, vomiting, low energy, headaches, confusion, mental changes or seizures. Mostly the hyponatremia, how I differentiate between hyponatremia or heat emergency is hyponatremia is something that I'm looking at what my hydration has looked like. And it's not super hot out, which heat can also affect it because you are becoming more dehydrated the more you sweat. This is definitely something that we need to take into consideration here. The biggest thing for me is that I feel this more internally versus when I have a heat situation, I feel more external, like feel like my body's baking a little bit. This one just feels like internally I'm fatigued. Something's going on inside of me. That's what I've noticed. So if left undid, hyponatremia can cause brain swelling, seizures, coma, and death. We want to, again, keep an eye on that, keep an eye on urination, things like that. So how to prevent hyponatremia, next slide. Know your risks. Medical conditions and medications can make it even worse, such as diuretics, antidepressants, pain medications. If you have chronic heart failure, things like that, this is going to make you more at risk for this. So keep an eye on that. Avoid overhydration. This is probably the biggest thing I see. In fact, just in races years ago, they used to, in races, they would require a weigh-in at the halfway point or so. And I was in one, I was in Leadville 100, and at mile 50, they weighed me and they said, oh, you've lost too much weight, you need to gain that weight back. So they forced me to drink about 3 or 4 pounds of water. And we can say now definitively that is a very bad thing to do because it does lead you into the hyponatremia. So you're diluting the body's natural serum in there and the electrolyte balance that it wants. A sudden increase in the hydration without also including electrolytes is going to cause that. So drink to thirst, let that dictate when you drink. And then again, balance it out. Make sure you're taking in electrolytes. Gatorade and Powerade are okay, but they're not phenomenal. I like electrolyte tablets or supplements, depending on how hard I'm going out there, or if I'm going out into some heat, I'm gonna preload my electrolytes a little bit. Next slide. Hypothermia. I think we've all been there before, especially at a University of Utah football game in the fall. And we can all get a little cold out there. This happens anytime your body's core temperature drops below 95. And yes, that can even happen during our typical hot Utah summers. The body chilling out is not just about the weather outside. Definitely make sure you're prepared. It does not have to be freezing outside in order for your body to get too cold. You hop in a river, that's going to dramatically decrease your core temperature. Exposure to elements, wind, rain, rapid drop in temperatures after sunset. We see it all the time in the desert. People go out there, it's hot during the day and they're sitting in shorts and a tank top, and then the sun goes down because they want to catch that beautiful sunshot for their Instagram post. And they hike out and they are freezing cold because they did prepare for the sun goes down. So once the sun goes down, specifically in the desert, which Utah is a desert, it gets cold fast. So hypothermia is something you should definitely be very aware of. Risk factors include strenuous outdoor activities when you're sweating and you're fatigued. Specifically, if you're out there running and you're running really hard, you're hiking really hard and you're just drenched in sweat, you're at a ridge line and there's a nice cool breeze, and you roll your ankle and you're sitting up there and you don't have a jacket, you don't have extra clothes to warm yourself up. All of that lightweight gear that you've taken up there, those lightweight clothes and that sweat is going to chill you out really quickly. Dehydration, low blood volume, that's going to affect your risk of hypothermia. Medications, barbiturates, antidepressants, things like that, and other medical conditions. So hypothyroidism, low blood sugar, high blood pressure, things where your body doesn't do a great job at regulating your core temperature. So stage 1 of hypothermia, you're going to get shivering, a little reduced circulation. You might notice that, if you pinch your fingers together and you look at them, how that capillary refill is really decreased. That's going to be kind of one sign that when you're just starting to get into it. Stage 2, you're getting a slower, weakened pulse, slowed breathing, your coordination starts to disappear, you're getting maybe a little irritable, and you start to feel tired or confused. That's stage 2. That's when things are getting worse. And that's when we really need to seek some attention. The advanced stages is your pulse is starting to disappear. Your breathing is incredibly low and you have a loss of consciousness. Essentially, your body is starting to shut down and this will lead to death. So definitely treat this immediately. Call 911. Get someone warmed up, do what you can to help them, and then go get help. Prevention, acronym COLD is a great way to do it. Clothing, warm, dry clothing that is moisture wicking. Cotton is no-go, no cotton. Wool is great, and any kind of synthetic fiber that is hydrophobic, which means it'll hold on to the moisture. It wants to get rid of it. It's going to wick it through. That's what you want to get into. Make sure your clothing is open. If you have a jacket, let it breathe a little bit. You don't want to put yourself in a plastic bag because that will just get more body moisture or more moisture on the body. It won't wick it away. You have that dormant sweat, which is going to keep you cold. You're going to lose a lot of heat that way. Dress in loose layers, again, for that exact same reason, and stay as dry as possible. And it kind of all works together to keep moisture off the body, to keep your body moving, to keep it warm, and also allow a little heat to trap in there with those loose layers. If you suspect hypothermia, call 911, get out of the cold, remove any wet clothing, even if it's cold out. If you have a wet, this is why you see in the movies all the time, someone falls into a river and they're in the middle of the Arctic tundra. The first thing they're going to do is strip all their clothes. Even if it's cold outside, you want to get that moisture off of you for the reason of it is going to pull more of that core body temperature away from the body. Remove any wet clothing and then start rewarming. That is rubbing the body, rubbing the chest. Try to stay calm. You don't want to go into shock, but definitely try to get your body as warm as possible. Friction is going to be your number one friend, or cuddling up with another partner who might not be going through hypothermia, or if you're both doing it together, body heat it together. That's going to help a lot.
All right. Thanks, Zac. We're going to jump right into lightning safety. I learned a lot while I was putting these slides together, and it kind of freaked me out, to be perfectly honest. So the most surprising fact I learned was that they carry more than 10 million volts. And then for reference, a power line usually has 10,000 volts. Home outlet has 110. And then it is coming in at 30,000 Kelvin. And the surface of the sun is 6,000 Kelvin. So for reference, you don't want to get struck by lightning. It can cause a wide range of injury, kind of depending on how it struck you. So anything from mild burns to cardiac arrest to brain hemorrhage to death. And then, like I said, different types of strikes can cause different types of injury. Direct strikes are the least common, but if you are struck this way, they end up being the most fatal or injurious. Sorry, I can't say that word. And then an indirect strike is the most common. So that's what we'll kind of see the most injuries from, but only because it's the most common. So what happens? So we're going to talk about the two most common types of strikes. So a ground current strike causes more than 50% of the injuries and fatalities. This happens when lightning strikes an object like a tree or the ground near you, and the current goes straight through the ground and then through you. The current typically travels up one leg throughout your entire body, including your brain, cardiovascular system, lungs, and then out the other leg. So you'll usually see an entrance point and then also an exit point with this one. A side flash, this occurs, accounts for 33% of injuries. This occurs when lightning hits a taller object and part of the strike kind of glances off and then strikes you as well. So these are the different injuries that can kind of occur. And as we start moving through this, some of the pictures, especially we get into like the animal encounters, are going to get a little bit more graphic. So these ones weren't too bad, but I did try to include warnings later on so you guys can look away and wait for those pictures to pass. But like I said, lightning strikes can cause a wide array of injuries. So everything from cardiac arrest, arrhythmias, burns, deep wounds, tissue damage, coma, and spinal cord injury. If you do get struck by lightning, or if you are with someone who does, it's really important to not move them. It's pretty hard to tell in the field if you're not trained to try to tell if they have a spinal cord injury or not. So it's just safer to kind of call for help and wait. And then also neuropathy, limb numbness and weakness, pulmonary edema, and then ear damage, including hearing loss and vertigo, corneal damage, blindness, internal bleeding, and broken bones. Again, don't move someone if they've been struck. Call for help, wait for professional rescuers to arrive to get that person out of the situation. So prevention is key, kind of the overwhelming theme of this entire series. Let's see. So make sure you check the weather before you go. Even if it's clear now, be aware of storm systems moving into the area. It only takes 20 minutes for a storm to roll in across the valley. So if you are on the Wasatch Front and you see a storm coming over the Oakers, you have 20 minutes before that is right on top of you. We used to track lightning for wildland using the WeatherBug app. It's one of my favorite ones. You can kind of see lightning strikes in the area. You can watch lightning strikes kind of moving through an area with the storm system. I don't know if it works off Wi-Fi. I haven't had to use it that way, but it's definitely really helpful to check weather patterns before you head out, especially in the late afternoon. So also starting early is really important. Lightning is most active from late morning to early evening. And a lot of our storm systems start moving in probably early afternoon in my experience. On a very, very clear day, I've gotten a late start and I've gotten caught in hailstorms on peaks. I've gotten caught in snowstorms on Kings Peak twice now. And then I've also gotten caught on numerous rainstorms up at Deer Valley. Do not recommend. It is pretty scary to have lightning crack off around you and to have nowhere to go. So I would say plan your run accordingly. Make sure that you are sticking to the lower elevations when you do see a storm moving in and for whatever reason you can't not run that day. And then just try to avoid exposed ridge lines and open meadows. Try to kind of stick in with the trees as much as possible. But the best thing is to just not even go. So we're going to do some true or false here, provided my PowerPoint cooperates. So true or false, it only takes 20 minutes for a storm to completely cross the valley. True, false, anyone?
True.
True, yeah, okay, cool. So like I said, if you see it coming, 20 minutes is probably not enough for you to actually get down, especially if you're doing a longer run. But it can get you to a safer location. So make sure you're paying attention. Head on a swivel, good situational awareness. Lightning never strikes the same spot twice. True or false? False. It often strikes the same spot repeatedly, especially if it's a pointing isolated object like a tree or a small tree stand. And then lightning only strikes the tallest object. This is false. It doesn't discriminate. It might strike the meadow you're standing in instead of the trees around the meadow. Another round here. So no clouds in the sky means you're safe. False. This is actually really scary to learn. lightning usually strikes miles ahead or behind a storm. So up to 3 miles usually is a good average striking range, but it can strike up to 10 miles away. Even when the skies are appearing clear, there can still be lightning and electrical activity there, which is pretty scary. Lie flat to stay safe. This is a huge, very common misconception. This is actually false. This makes you more vulnerable, not less. If you think about it, when you lay down on the ground, that whole, whatever, I'm 5'3", that whole 5'3" of me is providing all of that points of contacts and providing more surface area. So if the ground is struck or a tree is struck and kind of does the ground strike, like I mentioned before, it increases your likelihood of getting struck as well. Avoid taking shelter under a tree. Yes, true. Like I said, if the tree is struck, electricity will travel through the ground, which then spreads out in all directions. And then this can actually cause serious injury or even kill you. So what to do if you're caught in a storm, which unfortunately has happened to me more times than I care to admit. Get down quickly. Like I've said, I'm going to keep hammering this home. Get below tree line as fast as possible. Like I said, 20 minutes won't get you off the mountain entirely, but can get you to a much safer location. Avoid open meadows. This makes you a super easy target, especially if you're the tallest thing in that meadow. Avoid single trees or small tree stands. So the more trees there are, the more dispersed electricity will be if lightning strikes the area. So if you have a small tree stand of like 3 or 4 trees versus, a tiny clump of trees of like, I don't know, 15, the amount of energy per tree, if that one of them was struck, is going to be dispersed. And so if you're in with a little bit more trees, you're less likely to actually be seriously injured, I guess I should say. And then I put it on this slide, but it really goes for both of them. Wait until it's safe. So you don't want to resume activity in the area until at least 30 minutes after the last round of thunder rolls through. So sometimes you'll have lightning without thunder. So just try to keep an eye on the skies, watch the lightning strikes, make sure that you are kind of counting down and aware of the time since the last seen lightning strike. So now if you're out in the open, what do? Get low, do not lay flat. Again, that increases your likelihood of getting struck. Crouch down as low as you can. Ideal position is here to the right. You're gonna wanna have your heels up to minimize contact with the ground. Stand on your pack or a jacket or anything in between you and the ground if possible. You're gonna put your hands over your ears because thunder is gonna crack off around you. And if you've never been directly below a thunderclap, it is deafening. So make sure you're protecting your hearing as well. If you're in a group, spread out. I've seen everything from spacing between 25 to 100 feet. So basically just try to spread out as much as possible, I think would be the safest thing. And then you're going to want to avoid bodies of water. So make sure you're distancing yourself from creeks, streams, lakes, anything like that, any type of standing water. I'm sure we all know, water is a big attractor of electricity. So as you can see, they're crouched down pretty low. They have their hands over their ears and then their heels are up off the ground. Provided you can balance, I understand, especially if you've been running, you might not be able to do that. So keeping your heels on the ground is fine. You mainly just want to minimize the amount of you that's touching the ground while also keeping your balance. You also don't want to tip over and fall over and get struck. So what to do if you or someone you're with has been struck. So call 911 immediately. It is safe to use a cell phone during a storm, I promise. You may not have service, and that's a completely separate issue. Scene safety. So before you rush into the area to check the person who's been struck, make sure it's completely safe. I understand if you're concerned and they're unconscious or they're not responding to you when you're calling for them. It can be really tempting to just rush out there and administer first aid. A lot of us, that's kind of what we do, is we go into areas where people are, injured or hurt and try to help them. but just be really heads up that you can also become a victim yourself, and you can't do anyone favors. You know, you won't be able to call for help. You won't be able to tell people what happened if you're also in the field having been struck as well. So let's say it's safe, you rush out there. First things you do obviously are check their airway and circulation, administer rescue breathing if they're not breathing and they have a pulse, and then administer CPR as well if they do not have a pulse and are not breathing. Again, make sure you have EMS on the way, otherwise you will be doing CPR indefinitely, and that is exhausting. And then the other big thing is to stay put. I mentioned it earlier, but make sure you're not moving anyone who's bleeding or if they have broken bones, unless it's absolutely necessary. So if you can get them to a safer area as like lightning's cracking off around you, that might be an instance to actually move them. However, really, really, really be cautious with this. They may have a spinal injury that you don't know, and you can actually cause them much more damage than if you just left them until EMS helped you extract them out of that situation. So now we're going to talk about more environmental injuries, including kind of terrain, wildfires, air quality, stuff like that. And then also animal encounters, which unfortunately we have a lot of in the Wasatch. So this one really seems like a no-brainer, but we've actually seen a lot of avoidable injuries come through the ER. So make sure, as far as footwork, Zac mentioned in the beginning, speed work is a really good way to build that relationship between your brain and your feet, and your eyes and your feet, to stay safe and balanced when you're running on these like really technical trails, or as you go into low visibility. I know I've tripped many times. I've had to get stitches a couple times. I've also rolled my ankle on running too fast on trails that I definitely shouldn't have. They were covered with some leaves and I kind of misjudged where a rock was underneath. So even experienced runners, novice runners, anyone can kind of get tripped up by this. So just make sure you're paying attention. Footwear, if you're new, make sure you have the right shoes for the job. A lot of people will just kind of take their road shoes and hit the trails. And for the most part, that's pretty fine. However, when you start getting into these much more technical trails, we're going to start seeing a little bit more weather kind of pick up as we move into late summer, early fall. Steep and slippery trails really call for a much more aggressive shoe. So make sure that your footwear is matching the trails that you're planning on running on. And especially if you're like me, I have a bunch of shoes in my arsenal, I guess, but I also I have my favorites, and some of them I should probably retire because they really don't have any tread left. And then fatigue. This is kind of a overwhelming theme throughout. The more tired you are, the more likely you are to trip and fall, the more likely you are to get injured, whether it's a musculoskeletal injury like I'm talking about here, or you start to see more of the physiological injuries like rhabdo and hyponatremia. So just heads up, if you're tired, don't push it too hard. Just turn around, go home, live to run another day.
Hey, Michelle, I'm just going to interrupt for just 1 second. So for anybody who needs to jump off, I'm going to launch the polling questions now. But for those that can stick around and watch this finish, please stay with us. All you, Michelle, sorry about that.
Okay, yeah, no problem. Okay, so wildfires. Yes, even this last week, I got off shift at 8 a.m., looked out. I thought it was a storm system moving in. It was not. It was smoke. So I have a ton of wildfires every summer. Before you go, make sure there are not any wildfires in your area. As a firefighter, I always look at the SIT report just because I'm morbidly curious. So if you just Google SIT report fire, it should pop up. But that really only covers the last 24 hours. It doesn't really cover anything that's cropped up recently. And it usually only picks up big fires. So if there's smaller fires, there's been plenty in the Wasatch that we've seen this year that haven't ended up on the SIT report. So just check the news. Don't go out if there's anything in the area. It's just not worth it. If you're sensitive to air quality, make sure you're checking the air quality before you go. If you have asthma, bring an inhaler. There's nothing worse than being on a mountain and having, smoke or something roll in and then having an asthmatic reaction and not having any kind of rescue inhaler with you. You can also consider wearing an N95 or KN95. These are both effective as far as filtering out smoke particles, which kind of cause a lot of that irritation. And then have an exit strategy. So make sure, especially in wildfire territory, especially during wildland season, the most dangerous times are between between 10 and 6 p.m. Wildfire activity starts to ramp up. Things can like weather systems start moving around. So wildfires can change in this time frame. So make sure you know how to get back to your car, especially if you need to get out really quickly. Multiple routes are ideal. And then make sure you have a map app that works without service that also has the trail on it. A lot of maps don't have trail systems. So wildfire safety. So heads up, red flag warning days, make sure you're staying close to the car. I would consider doing a loop instead of an out and back. That way, if you need to bail early, you can. Make sure you're looking at the skies when you're running. If you see any smoke, leave. Don't wait around. Extreme fire weather, unfortunately, has been the norm recently, especially over the last few years. We've had record fire activity. So just make sure if you see anything, just leave. Just leave. Things can blow up and change very quickly, and you can become entrapped. And then escape. This is really, I put this on here, but this really isn't an option. You should have already left. If there's absolutely no way out and no one there to guide you, make sure you can see the fire, get below it as soon as possible. Do not let it get below you. You will not outrun it. And then do your best to avoid chutes and chimneys, but just leave. Animal encounters, super fun in the Wasatch. It's actually really weird coming out from California and seeing how much fun wildlife we have. So rattlesnakes, here's some quick tidbits. I'm going to go over a little bit more in detail. Rattlesnakes, stay back at least 5 feet, give them space. Moose, keep your distance, try to put a tree or a rock or something in between. Bears, stay calm, back off. These guys usually don't want to see people and they'll take off. And then mountain lions, get big, get loud, stand your ground. So rattlesnake myths, do not suck the venom out. It doesn't work. Holes are too tiny. Venom disperses too quickly and you cannot generate enough suction, even with the little commercial suction devices that are in the kits. Don't buy the kits, they're pointless. Don't apply a tourniquet. This is a big misconception. This will not slow the spread and it actually causes more damage to the tissue that has been affected. Don't apply ice. This actually vasoconstricts and pulls the venom deeper into the body, damaging more tissue. And then it also restricts healthy blood flow to the area that's already been damaged. So don't apply ice. And then make an incision. For some reason, this pops up on a lot of websites as like a good idea. Don't do that. There's no reason to. Let the doctors and the surgeons do that. So prevention is key. They're most active at dawn and dusk. They're cold-blooded. They move to and from the sun around these times. Leash up. I have a dog. I love him to death. I really only go on trails where I'm very comfortable and that have a lot of people when I take them off leash, because then wildlife, rattlesnakes, et cetera, usually are scared off by then. But I'm very, very, very much aware of where we're going and what's out there. And then watch yourself when you're scrambling or climbing near rocks, logs, stumps. If you can't see where you're putting your hands and feet, do not put them there. And then rattlesnakes often rattle when disturbed, but they just as often strike first and then rattle. So make sure you're keeping an eye out. You can see in the pictures here, these guys can camouflage pretty well. So listening is great, but just make sure your head's up on where they are. So if you do see or hear one, stay calm, listen to where it's coming from before you move. You don't want to accidentally step on it or put yourself in more danger. Like I said, give at least 5 feet of space. Striking distance is 1/3 to 1/2 of its body length, but you don't want to misjudge and get bitten. So just 5 feet is safe. We don't have any of those monster snakes out here. So, and then leave it alone. Don't try to catch it. Don't try to kill it. You don't need to bring it into the ER and say, this is what bit me. We'll take your word for it. And it's actually illegal to kill them. And then don't throw anything at it. They often move towards the object because they're curious. and not away from it. So this is where I was talking about the graphic photos are coming up. If you're queasy, bounce, take a break, or continue having the sound in the background. So rattlesnake is venom is hemotoxic, meaning it attacks the circulatory system and causes hemorrhaging and tissue damage. So it can result in a variety of injuries, including, just massive swelling, to like really blistering, a little bit more necrotic tissue, as you see on this guy's finger here. And then it can actually cause compartment syndrome, which is kind of what happened in the arm on the bottom, where surgeons will actually go in and make an incision to relieve a lot of that pressure and to get circulation back into that limb. And that's actually got a skin graft on it as well. So serious stuff. But death is very rare. Usually it's just injury. And if you seek medical attention quickly, it's not as serious. A third of the bites are dry bites. So no venom has been injected. They're more like warning bites. They don't want to waste any good venom on you. No offense. You can walk or ride it out. If your symptoms are mild, slowly make your way back to your car, keeping your heart rate low and controlled. Don't panic. Cover it up. So loosely cover it with gauze. Don't try to like wrap it tightly. You're not trying to mobilize anything. You really want to keep that blood flow going to the area to kind of minimize damage. And then also call 911, get a ride to the nearest hospital for an evaluation, or you can go by ambulance, whatever, if your symptoms are a lot more serious. On the bigger end of the spectrum, we have moose. They're massive. And coming from California, seeing a moose in person on the trail was probably the most terrifying thing ever. So in Park City, they were pretty mellow. They're pretty used to people. But yeah, they are terrifying. I would much rather run into almost any other creature on the trail than a moose because they are mean. Again, most of these animals, I think almost all these animals are most alert at dawn and dusk, but these guys are still kind of active throughout the day. So heads up, and then especially around water at dawn and dusk. I'm going to say it 1,000 times, keep your dog on a leash. It's against the law for dogs to chase or harass moose. So on the off chance that a ranger sees you and wants to make your day even worse, just heads up on that. And then seasonal aggression. Bulls are really aggressive during mating season. So we're actually coming into mating or rutting season as it's known. I think right now it's either late August, early September. So it's coming up and they are mean. And then cows are really aggressive during spring and summer when they have babies with them. So moose attacks are actually much more common than bear attacks. Bears will run away. Moose do not care. They will charge you. Like I said, I would not want to run into these guys on the trail. So the most important thing to do with any of these animal encounters is to just stay calm, stay level-headed, stay clear thinking, give them space. For the most part, if you're running into a moose on the trails in the Wasatch, my experience is for the most part, they've been pretty mellow. They're pretty used to people, especially if you're on a more populated trail. If you're in the backcountry, this is completely different. But either way, still kind of give them space. More often than not, they'll just leave you alone. And if you give them space, it'll give them time to kind of move on and leave you alone and to not feel threatened. Keep an eye on its behavior. Licking their snout, pinning their ears back, lowering their heads. This all signals aggression and a charge is probably going to be imminent. Back up slowly. Don't run. Moose can run 35 miles an hour. You, my friend, cannot. And then if you are charged, hide. Try to get behind a tree, a rock. Creatures with 4 legs, especially moose, have a hard time making those tight turns. So it sounds ridiculous, but even just running around a tree can really make an impact, and then they'll kind of lose interest and leave if you can't get to something safer like a vehicle or a high area. And then if you are knocked over, curl up, get in the fetal position, protect your head, and just wait for the moose to leave the area. Again, most wild animals are not going to continue to attack you. They just kind of want to get you to leave them alone. And once they see that you're not a threat because you're in the fetal position, most of the time they will leave you alone. So bears, black bears are kind of a misnomer. They go from anything from blonde to dark brown to black. Again, dawn and dusk. They're most active 30 minutes before sunrise, and then they don't go to bed until after sunset. I've had a couple encounters with black bears on the trails, and they were actually, I think, well after sunset. So around camping areas, they usually kind of come out at night. They're a little bit more nocturnal because they know that people are going to be asleep, quiet, leaving them alone. They can kind of dig through the trash and raid campsites without being bothered. Again, leash your dog, safety in numbers, try to run in a group or at least with a friend. Be loud. These animals do their best to avoid humans. So if you're loud on the trail, you know, talking, stepping on sticks, you know, stepping on leaves, whatever you can do to kind of make noise, these guys will hear you and they'll just bounce. So the only encounters that I've had have been me coming up to the bear because I was bombing down the trail at the end of a run, and actually just kind of surprising them. And they both encounters have taken off. And then this is a big one. Carry a bear spray, not a gun, as far as deterrent. If you want to carry a gun, carry it. But just know that bear spray is so much more effective at deterring bears than a gun. So it's 90% deterrent versus 84% with a handgun as far as deterring them and getting them to get away from you. And then if you are going to carry bear spray, know how to use it. You're going to spray it out and kind of put it like a shield, and watch and let it fall in between you and the bear. And then have it accessible. It doesn't help you if you can't even get it out of your pack in time. So if you are unfortunate enough to have a bear encounter, note their behavior. Like I said, black bears are the only bears we have in Utah. And for the most part, they're not aggressive. They are more curious. They'll stand up, they'll kind of sniff around. They want to get a better look at you. They just want to see what you are. And then just kind of wait it out, give them a second. Don't run, don't try to climb. Just once they notice you, they usually leave. If you run or climb, it'll provoke their predatory instincts and they will give chase, and you're not going to outrun these guys. And then if you are charged, spray. Like I said, bear spray is the most effective defense for preventing injuries. Guns are not effective at preventing injury. Here is why. The injured bears will still attack you. So what you want to do, your best defense is deterring them from even coming near you, and that's with bear spray. The research has shown, this is on numerous sites, injury rates were the same with those as people that carried a handgun and fired at the bears than people who didn't have any defense with them. So no bear spray, nothing. So again, bear spray, relatively cheap, super easy to learn how to use. And it's just a good thing to have in your back pocket. I usually bring it with me on longer runs or when I kind of going into bear country. And then if attacked, fight. Focus all of your blows and kicks and stuff at its head and muzzle. Most animals will leave you alone if you put up a good fight. They're kind of looking for an easy meal. And then cougars, lots of names. I call them mountain lions, so I might refer to it as mountain lion. Again, dawn and dusk, leash up your dog, safety in numbers, be loud. And then this is a big one. If you find an animal, especially deer or elk, leave it. Cougars really kind of stash their kills, and then they come back to it a later time, and they will do anything to defend it. So some of you guys, I'm sure, have seen this video from last year. If not, Google mountain lion or cougar attack Utah, and it will pop up. This thing went viral last year. This guy did everything right. So stand tall, don't crouch or play dead, try to look as big as possible, wave your arms or jacket above your head. If you have little ones with you, bring them close, pick them up, whatever you can do to look bigger. Clump together if you are with someone else. Don't run. These fools are fast. You are not. Maintain eye contact. The best thing to do is kind of move backwards and sideways. Do not turn your back on these creatures at all. They do like to attack from above. And then talk loudly. Again, this video has a really great example of what to do. He's talking loudly at it, kind of telling it to go away. And then again, back away slowly, maintaining eye contact. If attacked, fight back. They will flee. They're big scaredy cats. So once you actually start fighting back, they just want to bounce. And then these are kind of general safety tips. I know we're kind of getting it close with time. So know before you go, know the trail, the terrain, what's out there, and then the forecast. Let people know where you're going, what your route is going to be, and like what direction you're going to be hitting it from, how far you're going to go, when you'll be back, and have someone be accountable. I had a friend one time, I didn't come back at my proposed time, and she called my mom. I mean, I was hours after. So she called my mom, she called my friends out here. So have somebody like that, know where you are. And then be prepared, dress appropriately, bring food, water, light rain jacket, first aid kit, food, headlamp, whatever. And then hydrate. A little bit more. So these are some helpful maps that I like to use. You download them before you go. They work offline or when you don't have service. And then touching back on the injury prevention piece, listen to your body, start slow, don't overdo it. If it doesn't feel right, stop, go get checked out by a doctor. You know your body really well. There's no point in pushing it that hard. And then running buddies are always awesome. There's a couple of groups I've listed here. If you need to meet somebody or if you want more information on trails, a lot of people update trail conditions and stuff. I use this especially in the winter. And then these are some of my favorite things I like to bring on every single run. And then these are items that I bring on longer runs, or if I plan on getting lost. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. If you guys want to copy the slides, let me know. And then if there's any questions.
Yes, and this will be on the YouTube channel as well. So if you guys don't know that, we can definitely send you guys everybody to the YouTube channel so you can watch this again. I did have one question.
Yes.
So compartment syndrome, I know you guys didn't really talk about that, but, and I think especially for us in the ER, we think of it more as a direct blow. We're seeing it more with sports injuries, but I know that it can happen in running. So I don't know if you guys could touch a little bit more on why it happens or what we would look for.
I just have a quick story. It can happen because of rhabdo. We had a guy on our crew who got rhabdo, super fit guy, just kind of overdid it. He had rhabdo in his forearm and he actually went to the U. He had to get a fasciotomy cut open because he was starting to develop compartment syndrome. And then I can kind of let Zach talk about the physiology behind it.
Yeah, so compartment syndrome is typically happens when you have more of like an acute injury, like you said, like rhabdo. Maybe there's a blunt force trauma or something like that that just kind of causes that muscle group. So you have like your big muscle, right? It's usually in your anterior tibialis, those muscles right there. So what's gonna happen is you have your big muscle group, and then you have smaller little kind of tubes of muscles that go throughout that, and then even smaller inside there and even smaller inside there. So what will happen is each of those has a little fascia around, like safety net around it that is not meant to expand. It's meant to keep it so that it can stay strong. And when it fills up with a fluid, creatine kinase, whether it's inflammation from cellular death, whenever cells kind of rupture and die, they release some chemicals. The body recognizes that, sends it down there to cause some inflammation. That's its protective measure. And so if you're tearing muscle quickly and your body doesn't have enough time to flush some of that out and get it all nice and even on both sides, then it will start to swell up that fascia and it will fill that up, and then it won't have a way to release. It's kind of like it puts too much pressure on it, and then there's no opportunity for that to flow through. So where we see that most of the time in running, compartment syndrome isn't something you'll typically see in runners that like develops over time, again, like a fall or something like that. Or if you're doing an extreme amount of downhill running, where every time your heel strikes the ground, that anterior tibialis muscle that holds your toes up and lets them gradually touch the ground versus slapping down super hard. As we do that eccentric muscle movement, we tear muscle fibers more than a concentric muscle movement. So that being said, the layman's terms of that is when you're going downhill and your body's trying to slow down that impact, it actually tears muscles more. And when you tear muscles more, and again, that flow doesn't happen as quickly as we'd like it to, then that's when you start to get that compartment of muscle starts to swell up from the inside. And then it's one of those positive reactions, which is a bad thing because it swells up, which causes it to fill up and not, you don't get the blood flow, you don't get any of that going through, which causes it to swell up even more. So that's typically when you're going to see it running. The best thing you can do for like a compartment syndrome is a compression socks, compression sleeves, things like that go over your calves. And it's typically for the anterior tibialis muscle. That's where we see it 99% of the time if it happens anywhere. And it's usually because of that eccentric toe drop on a downhill. Like we see it a lot in downhill marathon courses where people are just shredding and going as hard as they can. And that force load just kind of tears muscles in there. And it's a really small muscle. It's not very big, so it does swell up rather easily.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that does. Like I said, I don't think it's very common that we see it in runners. I think we had somebody once that was doing the climb. So a lot of one of the, the big climbs up the mountains, and I can't remember what that's called again. But I think there was one person that had presented with compartment syndrome because of that.
Yeah, you're only going to typically see it on big things like that. It's not as super common. Road runners specifically, or even a lot of runners, it's when you do a big heavy load up or down a hill.
I think that was a steeplechase, maybe. Is that what event it was?
I can't remember.
Something like that.
I think it was one that my friend was trying to talk me into, and I said no. So
smart choice.
I was like, I did the climb for cancer up the stairs in the bank downtown, but that was I didn't go up the mountain, just the stairs. So, yeah. And does anybody else who stayed on? Thanks for those who stayed on. Does anybody else have any questions? And I did post our YouTube playlist in the chat box. So it usually takes us about, Linda, a couple weeks sometimes to get these posted on there, but it will be there and posted for everybody to see again.
I'm a little behind on posting, but we'll get some things up.
Okay. Perfect. Well, Michelle and Zach, thank you. That was great information. I'm a hiker, so yeah, I've had to run from moose a couple of times. Luckily not from bear, but moose, I did have to go hide behind a tree because it was a juvenile bull and wasn't happy that we were on the trail.
Yeah,
so
sounds about right. It's pretty accurate for moose. They're awful.
Yeah. All right. Yes. Thank you guys so much for your time. Really appreciate it. This was a great presentation. And I know that everybody's learning lots and loves to go out to the mountains. So thank you again for joining us.